some general but important areas over which we have flown before, but let me see if I can offer up some new variations of possible flight patterns so that you might make your own approach. In our continuing attempt not to ever name this, while simultaneously offering up certain possibilities now and then, I could, especially for what I have in mind for tonight, mention the possibility of referring to this as biohistory. And then maybe point out that that does not refer to this being the history of biology. And of course, you may figure it out from there. There is a way that you could look upon, or that you should use one of your eyes to look upon history. History being just everything that happened. I don't mean just academically, but everything that seems to have happened right up until just a second ago when I said everything that seemed to have happened. It's like the general out there. Just with the other eye, you could look internally at a kind of history, but it would be then based upon like a personal in here. And as we have mentioned before, where things overlap, anything, but where things overlap is always a secret. And if you tried at various times for your own ad hoc reasons to ponder what you're doing and what I am attempting to sketch out in this, and you tried with one eye to look out at history, the kinds of things I use as springboards all the time, of apparently starting off talking about economics or politics, or even a phrase or a quote that I lifted out of history somewhere, biology, physics. If you looked at that as being all the general out there, history, and then internally be like what you think about what's happened, about what you heard that happened, but where they overlap, then you could look at as being the place of a third possible eye, because then you could look at this as being in the old human nervous system, my drawing, you could look at that where things are overlapping as being the new territory of intelligence, beyond the old world intelligence, beyond the sailing off of everything that is known and everything that is established. If you can begin to expand your own perception of what intelligence is, which I hate to tell you, but requires that you expand your intelligence to do it. I guess it's like saying that you wouldn't lose your glasses so often and misplace them if you could see better, I guess. But although there are ways in which at old world intelligence levels you could look at human intelligence almost as being based upon, or based in, the great out there. Or you could look at it as being solely within you if you had a more provincial, limited, simplistic operations of your own brain. But intelligence, the full measure of intelligence, does not exist out there, nor does it exist in man. What it is like a bond. It is the overlapping place where man and everything that seems to not be man meet. It is the unifying force that makes people people. That everything out there, and it does not matter, I do not have to come up with a definition, a full description of this. It is anybody's personal thinking of it. If I say everything that's not you, and you listen to it and you take that, anything right then that you think of then and over the full spectrum into the 4 dimensions of a seamless time span, anything that fits in there that you never feel is you. Bad news, good news, other people, sometimes not other people. Your family, but sometimes not your family. History. And then sometimes, well, history pre-1850. I don't know why. But whatever seems to be not you, taking that kind of consideration in all other humans, then the place where it overlaps is the very thing that makes you human, you and everyone else. Of everything that seems to not be you, that seems to be in some way disconnected from you, at least outside the great organ of your own skin. It's out there either in space or it's out there either in time. It's too far past, or your memory has shifted so much that it's too far gone, that it is now not part of your intelligence, maybe part of your memory, maybe part of something that you read about. It's not true. It is not out there, but neither is it all in here. Like as I guess some of you know, that philosophers, especially in Europe, when Europe began to grow up, got into all those kinds of brain hockey and soccer, trying to play around to, does reality exist out there? Does it exist in here? Which you can play with that if you just need a hobby, and they did for a long time. Of course, I might point out to you what eventually happened to the great British Empire, so let that be a lesson to you. Take that as a warning. Either what happened to the British Empire, or else consider that you could, if you keep it up, begin to look like John Locke. But we won't. It is not that intelligence exists out there in life, but it does not exist in man. It is where they overlap. That is what human intelligence is. If there is one thing that would be an absolute sure statement in this regard, if there's anything that could be said sans doute, would be this: that one undeniable purpose of the human intellect is to make there be an out there. Now we've flown around that area, and I've described it in several ways, and some of you have surely had your own views of this, and it does not deny any of that. But if you want one absolutely incontrovertible, unshifting verbal basis of what the purpose of the human intellect is, there's always that it causes men to have an out there. All right. Okay. Are we back to that? All right. Okay. Now, try this. The only way that things can ever possibly make sense is intellectually. That's it. It is not possible for things, and by things that's anything you fill it in: life, your life, general life, history, biology, death. It is not possible that anything can, I'm putting this in quotes, make sense other than intellectually. Now you could look at this, if you can see some of the ramifications of this before I get through with it, you could look at this as being the ultimate BS detector. In that, if anyone in history or now ever tries to tell you, that you ever hear anyone say that there is any way that things can make sense, and they offer any possibility that is not out and out intellectual, then you should hear something go, buzz. Such as, throughout history, which remember goes right up until I just said throughout history, you've had those in life's employ that seem to be of a clerical turn of mind, seem to be religious, and they have historically and up until today attempted to say that, as many people do, that life is actually in a way absurd, or it's unfair to the point of absurdity, and the only thing that might get a decent Christian, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist, blah blah through is not anything that you might be able to reason. No, my friends, no. Faith is the only thing that makes any sense in life. And then, assuming that they're dealing with a semi-literate group, they then must add, of course, it still doesn't make life make any sense. Well, in that, You can have faith that God is good. Allah is looking after us. Jehovah will see that justice prevails. Now, I'm playing the priest or rabbi part. Now, I'm as aware of you people that there's all kinds of injustices going on out there. So, and things do not make sense. If God's all the great guy he said he was and told all these other guys before us, then I don't know why he does this either. So it doesn't make sense, but have faith, because that's the only way that life makes any sense. You follow me? And everybody goes, Do you hear? We're not making fun of the religion. It's serving a purpose. But there is a continual offering up that there is some way that life and things, just fill in the blank, remember, but things can make sense. People have tried to offer it up politically. In more modern times, or more recent times, the Engels and Marx idea of class struggle and etc. So-called communism as not just a political force in a given country, but a political force that in some way will reshape human behavior. If you understand the communist theory, speaking of as a philosophical as opposed to just an out-and-out religious act, that if you understood it, then the injustices, the inequities of life make sense. And of course they don't. If they made sense, then communism or any other government would not have to put guns to people's heads. There would not be any exercise of some small group of people dancing with a whole other large group of people, and the large group of people, of course, are dancing backwards. There is no exception. There is no way that anything makes sense outside of the intellect. May we bank sharply 90 or more degrees, or maybe even fly upside down, and while you're semi-nauseous in the head, let me point out the obvious. If man did not have an intellect, there would be no possibility of things making sense intellectually, because if he did not have an intellect, he would not even have the concept of, or the question of, do things make sense or not? Thus, it is only intellectually that any sort of apparent answer can measure up to this self-styled, self-based game. It's the intellect's game. You would not have any conception of whether, or any question about whether things made sense or not, were it not for the intellect. And then to expect that there is any way that things are going to make sense beyond an intellectual aspect of things making sense, you are living in the old world forever. Forever. Now, I point out religiously and politically, people have tried to do it physically, but things do not make sense physically, because you're always faced with just the obvious of saying, well, wait a minute, what's the point of working real hard, getting an education, or going to church, going to the temple, trying to do anything, when a good friend of mine, a neighbor of mine, well, let me tell you this, neighbor of mine's son, they worked, the family sacrificed, the son had to work part-time, got his degree, was going to go into the father's business, walked off the stage, got his diploma, threw his hat up in the air, it hit an eagle, the eagle fell down beak first and killed him. That's not enough. The father was a great man, gave to charity, blah, blah, blah. He was on the way to visit one of the sick people in the parish, and a drunk driver hit him. It always gets down to death. Of course, now may I remind you that were it not for the intellect, the body would have no conception of death. You would have no more conception of death than birds do, to see other birds dead. You would have to have the intellect to have the conception of it. But now that you've got the intellect, still what I want you to see, that there is no way that on a physical level of trying to come up with some sort of rituals, eating habits, exercises that in some way will cause life to make sense do not work. They may be a good secondary entertainment for many people. There's nothing wrong with that. But there is no way through anything you can do physically, through any sort of torture to yourself, any sort of strenuous exercise, any kind of repetitious would-be ritualistic behavior that you could do faithfully all of your life will never make things make sense. You can look at it spiritually, emotionally, economically. You can look at it any way you want to, but you need to see that nothing will make sense. There's not even the possibility of it, other than intellectually. If I was running a decent, legitimate, certified flying school, I'd stop for the night, or maybe the month. Because the nervous system, the human brain has never considered it in that manner. And people are off, if you'll pardon the expression, flying in all kinds of different directions. Even one person believing that I am in some way involved with some sort of activity, they may not have used this term, but that's what it amounts to, that hopefully, as they say nowadays, will cause things to make sense. So just to be on the safe side, I'll go back to school, I'll join up with some kind of mental self-improvement thing, I'll get a book on memory improvement, I'll go back to church, I'll take up a new religion, I'll go to 2 or 3 different kinds of religions every week, and I will run on the nights I'm not in church or the synagogue. I'll run and I'll lift weights, and I'll only eat carbohydrates on Tuesday, and I'll eat a whole lot of starches on Thursday. Nothing. A hobby, entertainment, but it does not cause things to make sense. You might as well narrow down your sight and see that if we're going to continue for any length of time to talk about things making sense, there's only one area wherein even the possibility exists, and it's right there. This overlap. It's not even in the ordinary functions. It's not even in old world intelligence. But even that comes the closest. But at any given time, whatever the intelligence was, the old established intelligence is too late right now. It's already history. But there is no possibility, none whatsoever, no way you can discuss it, no way you can cut it, no way you can sew it back up, no way you can rearrange it, that emotionally, religiously, physically, any other equally, economically, politically, artistically, things will not make sense. And remember I said that we could call this biohistory. Even my opening gambits and throwaway lines are connected with whatever it is I start to do. There is a biological, and there is, if you want to look at biological as being your feeling presently of it being individual, and then there's the historical, that is, you can see it everywhere else. It's all a reflection of each other. A reason that people seek to how things make sense, and their attempts to do this are diffused to the point that you could call them omni-flight. That is, they go in any possible direction. The people try almost anything. It's not their stupidity, life is making them do it. Wherein, if you begin to see this, and you would like to conserve some energy, you're more interested in actually trying to have things make sense than you are simply to be entertained, to have a hobby, is at least remember that there's only one possibility of things ever making sense, only one area. Doesn't matter how big you are, how healthy you are, how fat you are, how thin you are, how short you are, how tall you are, what sex you are, what religion you are, how happy you are, how sad you are, how liberal you are, how conservative you are, how rich you are, how poor you are, how educated you are, how dumb you are, how excited you are, how calm you are, how clean you are, how dirty you are, whether you have a perm or straight hair, and anything else. It doesn't matter. The only possibility for things making sense is intellectually. Other than that, and intellectually, you can talk about things. You can talk about things apparently from a non-intellectual view, that is, religiously, emotionally, physically. And you can talk about them and even attempt some sort of theoretical paradigm of how things might make sense, or even try and cover why they apparently do not make sense now. But you are just standing in line kicking dirt. You're just drawing circles with your toes, and you're spitting, you're having fun. It's a hobby. It is only intellectually that things can ever make sense. And if for no other reason, remember that the whole concept of making sense is strictly an intellectual concept that is not physical. When you get below the verbal area of the loop, there is no, if we cut it off artificially, and you were still functioning some way as a more or less contemporary human with no language, you would have no concept, yea or nay, of things making sense. There'd be no question. You couldn't even conceive of it. It's not a matter of, all right, what's happening to you, does it make sense, or what you see in life, do things make sense or not? You might as well be talking to a possum. The concept of do things make sense, there's no reply. The game is based upon this creature having an intellect. Then the question arises, do things make sense or not? Do you see there's no possibility of bringing in any other potential response to it? And yet people look everywhere else. Now, let's take off and bear a little to the northeast sector. From the cellular to the institutional level, things must divide to grow. Now, this is certainly a general area over which we have soared, if not buzzed, some people's intellectual rooftops before. But what I'm going to try and sketch out, we have never covered before. At least you think that you know what I was about to say or going to say, because I want you to consider it more biologically, which of course are getting closer to the somewhat annoying reality of it all. Oh, I know. But if it gets too dry and boring, I'll pull back in history and politics, and I'll distract everyone. It's so easy. As you're flying along and you begin to get a little sick, all I got to do is say, oh, look over there! And you'll look and go, ah! You feel much better. Everything, if it's going to grow, has got to divide. And this is true from what would appear to be the internal, personally in here level, cellularly, of all of us, to the great general out there level of history. That's what I meant by institutionally. There is no escape from it. Things to grow must divide. Small sidestep for a second, another view of another thing. The maximum from old ordinary intelligence that can be intellectually perceived is always three-dimensional. And the minimal, for one to have an intellect operating, has got to be the good old apparent world of dualism. Now the former, that is the maximum of ordinary, of old world intelligence, the maximum being three-dimensional, is based upon the physical limits of man's intellectual, which is molecular, topography. It just is. Now the second part of there being this minimal base, for you to be intellectual, for you to have an intellect operating, you have to perceive minimally a world of dualism. But now this, that is the smaller end of the spectrum, This is due to the fact that everything, including the human intellect, must divide, and therefore all singles must become doubles. It's not theoretical, it's not philosophical, it is not because I say so, it's not because of a quirk of the universe, it's not because of some curse from the gods, it's not because an asteroid got too close to us, it's not because all the dinosaurs are hiding and shifting the tilt of the earth. It's because that all things, from the cellular to the institutional level, must divide to grow. It is thusly that in all the affairs of men there appears this. In case you still hadn't jumped ahead and when I said that we have flown over this area many times in general. In all things that live, all the affairs of man, let's go to that institutional level, everything very quickly, if it's going to live, develops schisms. Inner conflicts. It becomes fractionalized. Now, from the historical view, that is, from the old world view of men looking that life out here in some way is separate. How many examples do you want me to pull out? You must know enough. Look at all the common historical, social, intellectual, from the ordinary view, critiques, observations, but especially critiques of how the folly of man seems to have not march on, stumble along. Such as, I'll speak for that, those kinds of people playing out life's need for internal criticism. Somebody wired up to be a fairly anti-clerical observer and say, what in the world is there about humans that they keep trying to come up with religions and believe there's some kind of enlightened information available? Because if that were true, then you people tell me, why is it historically every religion that starts, some of them sounds pretty good after the first few lines of whoever starts it, and they're going to do good work, and they take up all their money from each other and they go give it to the poor, and they bring in homeless people, and they say that we're just here to help the people, and I've just got good news that'll help everybody, and that this religion is for everybody, and we're all little God's children, and we all should love each other. Then tell me this, why is it that within 2 or 3 weeks, internally, you got some group that begins to split off and say, wait a minute, we're doing all right for the first 2 weeks here, first 2 months, first 2 years, first 200 years, it doesn't matter. Why is it, if this religion was so great, how come half of them, somewhere along the way, you said, wait a minute, we're going to have to liberalize this, and half of them said, no. There's no such thing as liberalizing the truth. You're going off in the wrong direction. Politically. You can make the same observation. Some king, some form of government, some form of rule is espoused, is even put into action somewhere. And historically, the leader, the executioner of this form announces, it's recorded that he announced, is this not a great way to live? And all the people at one time went, yay! You said it, king. And yet, shortly after that, trouble. It's always trouble. And you do not have to live as you suspected in RC. River City. It's always trouble. But it is not because of psychological, it is not because of economic, it is not because of political turmoil and conflicting philosophies. It's because of this. From the cellular level, cellular, one in you, where you came from your mother's womb, from there to the greatest institutional, to the Catholic Church, one of the biggest institutions on this planet still, and everything in between. The thing, whatever it is, must divide to grow. Now, it appears to old world ordinary intelligence that something is amiss, that there is something inherently incongruous with the way an institution started. If it starts out and its pronunciation of itself is purpose A, to do good without any restrictions, unconditionally for all people, then something is inherently flawed within human nature and hence human institutions that they start something like this on an apparent religious, social, psychological, political basis, and they cannot, something that simple, to do good without regard to your station in life, just to do good. Something is inherently wrong either with people and then the reflections of it. For them to be able to start out with something so obviously simply self-proclaimed as their purpose, and within just an inordinate length of time there is internal conflict with the same ones that originated. These same 5, 10, 20 guys stood there and said, yes, this is our purpose. This is why we established this religion, this political system, this state. It's for this reason. And they all go, yes, we all agree. And I'll be damned, you turn your back, you come back there, and half of them are now plotting their overthrow, or half of them are saying, wait a minute, you guys are too orthodox. We're going to become liberal. Something is wrong, they say. Life makes human intelligence say something is wrong, and it's not. From the molecular to the institutional level, things must divide to grow. Although many times we have covered, and me pointing out how everything seems to produce its own opposition, that you can stand up, it happens in life, and apparently make the most innocuous suggestion of, hey, let's all be good people. And I pointed out that if that idea is going to take on any life, if it's not simply said, and a lot of people go, if it is going any further than that one announcement, then very shortly someone's going to oppose it, as insane as that seems. But this is not psychological. It is not the actions being motivated by individual desire for individual purposes. It is at the basic biohistorical level that all things, including all things man touches, all things that touches men, and especially where it all overlaps, it has got to divide to grow. I keep stressing this right now tonight because I know I have sketched out in such ways that many of you think of it, and I am not immune from using the term in the future to look at it a different way, to point out and use the term opposition, that everything seems to carry along its own opposition. But I want you to try and see more subtly, that maybe we can fly either closer to the ground or further away. It's the same thing, to where you can see things a bit more. Did you know it's an acceptable pronunciation in England to say subtly? It was nice I covered myself before I did it, didn't I? Subtly. Now wait for the letters to come in. Dear sir, come back a little lingual. As it is inevitable, and it's not really on the basis of opposition. It's on the basis that every little cell and every institution, if it is going to grow, and of course it's got to grow, you're talking about a short death. If it's going to grow, it has got to divide. To understand this, to have a continuing 4D awareness of this, or even a part-time 3D awareness of this, internally, personally, is to have a direct effect upon this kind of normally unusable, beyond analysis, operations within your own system, to wit. The kinds of affection, for instance, that you initially feel for your family, your lover, even this kind of stuff. Feeling, let's call it affection to start with. Interest, but let's call it affection. If it's going to live, it is going to soon divide. And when it divides, you have what seems to be, not this time going to call it opposition, although in some cases we would not be stretching the use of that word, would we? No, we would not. But it seems as though that there has been a division. Instead of talking about this, which maybe I will in a second, as an example, how about you fall in love? Oh, and you just can't do enough for her or him. And it's just love, 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 love. Oh, very shortly though, it's as though you become what? Of a second mind. As though you develop a certain kind of, oh, I don't know, ambiguity toward the relationship. Life is full of overworld attempts to explain this. They can't explain it satisfactorily because it cannot make any sense to them. Anything that you have an affection for, let me say with that example to call it affection, if it is going to live longer than a red blood corpuscle, which can't divide, it's why it's short-lived. But if your affection for anything, for a person, is any longer than that, more or less, then let's call it the affection. And let's call it, this qualifies now as an institution. Remember, everything from molecular to the institutional level. So your personal affection for a person is in there. If it's going to live, it's going to soon divide. There's going to be part of you now that, let's say that you are made up of 10 people who say, yes, I love her, by God. Very shortly, about 5 of them are going to go, well, you know. That 5 say, well, let's call her and go over there. And 5 of them go, They may not be overtly hostile, but there is an extreme lack vis-a-vis the first group, an extreme lack in this division of that kind of passionate affection, interest. It is inescapable. And to know this relieves one at the ordinary level of that kind of disquieting surprise, that kind of self-condemnation that you're especially supposed to feel nowadays if you want to get on TV on a talk show, I guess, or just to be up to date and with it. You've got to be full of that kind of self-condemnation about, how dare I need to work this out, because I used to really love my mother up until about the age of 5 or 6 when I could talk, and then sometimes I'd tell some of my neighbor kids, I'd say, you know, they won't admit it, but I know that they found me under a cabbage leaf. I'm not really their kid. But then half the time you'd run home and go, oh, I love you, Mommy. What'd I get? Would you bring me anything today? And I can still remember that, and I suffer over that. Division is inescapable. From a single cellular level in the 3D world to the widest extreme that your intellect can picture is what I mean by the institutional level. For those things that are alive, there is no escape from this. There's no way to make sense of anything by trying to keep it from dividing, which people do. Life has caused people to do this. They've never had this description, but they attempt to keep things from dividing intellectually. It is a form of, after having ingested the energies of life, it's an attempt not to go to the little boys or girls WC. It's a refusal to let go. It's to get the food in your jaw and to hold it forever. If you're alive, if you and what you're doing is alive, if what you are thinking is alive, it's going to divide. Not dissimilar to a cell. Just consider for the time being the percentage is not important, but it's just more or less going to divide in halves, whatever it is. Back in, for all you Christians and Jews, your background, back to the Genesis time. And some other religions, as you probably know, with the old idea that the real breakthrough into the 3D fabric of reality of the gods, some great primeval force coming in, that the first thing was the Word of God, the Word of the gods, the Word of the more complex reality. In the beginning was the Word, if I'm remembering Genesis in the 3 or 4 translations. Of course, remember that it was the British Empire that gave you the one that you read, so I don't want to go into that. It's up to you what you make of it. But in the beginning was the Word. All right, that could have been true. Could have been true. But let me tell you this. Very shortly, very soon after that, it split. Really, it split, and there was 2 words. It had to take place for the intellect to begin to breathe. The intellect, the nervous system of man would have never gone as high as it has gone. It would be higher than wherever it would have been with any other creature on this planet, sans us. Had not the Word split, divided, so that there were 2 words. It was only then that the intellect could begin the process of intellectual respiration. To actually begin to properly see this, though, requires not 2 words, not a one-time division, not that first stage of all singles must become doubles, to meet the minimal requirement for ordinary intelligence. That is, that you must be able to perceive, not philosophically. You don't have to even attempt to be a philosophical or a deep thinker, but everybody on this planet lives within the precepts of dualism. As long as there's any language in their skull, they can be illiterate. But you can certainly talk to them about the difference between what? Anything. Really? Yes. So you're illiterate, yes. That means you can't read. And some people can read and you can't read. That's right. Okay. It's probably better to, if you could read today than not read. Yeah, it probably is. Difference between good and evil. Yes, I know. Difference between the Braves winning and the not winning this year. Yes, I know. Difference between having enough to drink and not enough to drink. I understand. Difference between having too much to drink and try to drive and get arrested and not having drunk so much. I understand that. It's the dualism that is the basis of, the minimal basis of ordinary intelligence. Beyond that, to be able to even see, to begin to see past that, you have got to be able to use 3 eyes to get any proper view of what is going on, or life never makes any sense. We will turn the tape over, or this will not make any sense any further. All right, the 3 eyes. How about it this way? A reasonable, a make sense kind of king, a take charge kind of king, would always have one eye on his potential, if not overt, opposition. Potential adversaries. Huh? A more sophisticated ruler, however, would also keep his other eye on his present supporters, understanding that they are potential future adversaries themselves. All right. But a more complex sovereign would get a 3rd eye to watch for a specific normally unaccounted phenomenon, and that is that within these previously 2 noted areas of his supporters and his present adversaries, or his potential obvious adversaries, that within them very shortly, the group, either one of these two groups, is going to divide. Think about it a second. All right. That's the way you feel about it. Then I'll either make it worse or better. Let's pretend, I know as silly as it sounds, let's pretend I'm not actually talking about kings and politics. Let's imagine, how will I put this? Let's just imagine, just for a flight of foolishness for a second, that all of what I just said you could take in a, what is it, a Michigan Mercury, a metaphorical sense. Let's assume that just that I was not talking about kings and all that, that inside of your brain, your own intelligence, that if you were a basic king, you would keep your eye on what you apparently think. That is, your supporters. A simple king, that's all he would do. One eye would stay on his supporters. That if we were talking about your intelligence, your thinking, what would you, if you're a nice, simple, down to earth, salt of the earth kind of guy, what else have you got to think about? You don't consider anybody else's opinion. You don't have time for that. It interferes with drinking and fishing and polishing up your gun rack or whatever people do. It takes you away from being you. It takes away the saline of being that kind of the earth. At least some of it. So you would only keep one eye on your supporters. But now, let's assume that you some way squeezed through 8th or 9th grade, or some way you got your IQ into the double digits. In other words, you are now a more sophisticated ruler internally. Then you might keep your eye on what? Adversaries. That is, you might then begin to, even by old world standards, begin to pass for being an intellectual. That you could say, well, my opinion on the current state of the communist philosophy, especially in blah blah areas of the world, is such and such, but now I understand that there is a growing feeling, especially in the West, that blah 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 is happening. Although I am not of that school, I can ponder that position and see some validity. I can see that there may be some future impact come from what is basically, I assure you, a fallacious approach, but even there, incorrect theories based upon what is taking place now may eventually have some effect on my more correct observation of the way things actually are. That passes for being more sophisticated. That is having two eyes. That is being able to, it's of no great shakes and won't get you anywhere. But that in life, out in the middle class of ordinary life, is what normally passes for being more intellectual. Is the kind of people who are on life's behest taking care of more complex business. The first kinds are those who are still, no offense to the occupations, because many of us worked hard to get up to the area of being a bricklayer or a waiter. But you have, with a more simplistic view, goes along those who are taking care backstage at Disneyland. Then those that can see with two eyes, they're the ones designing up the advertising, thinking up new rides. But it takes three eyes. It would take a very complex. It would have to be into the new intellectual territories. It could not still be of the old world of a sovereign who not only, remember we're just playing like I'm not actually talking about kings and all that stuff, we're talking about inside your own brain, not only keep one eye on what seems to be his supporters, that is what you already think is true. Where the hell it came from. Only ordinary people think they know where it came from, like, well, I learned it. But here it is, you got these supporters. Always notice, if we're not talking about the nervous system now, if we're actually talking about kings, Those who get in power, they never ask why X people, any particular person, are supporting them. As long as you got supporters, as long as you take charge, and suddenly their faces you've never seen are there at the rally, the post-coup rally. They're all, yay, you know, we're supporting you all along. We were with you all the way. And they look around, he's never seen them before. Real kings, they never try and say, what do you want? Hell, he knows what they want. It takes one. But he never questions, why do you support me? Where did you come from? He knows where they came from. Nowhere. Or he knows where they came from. Everywhere. The woodwork, under my feet, out of my underwear. They're everywhere once you take charge. And yet now, if we're not talking about actual political events external, and we're talking about things internal, and you ask people, where did you get your supporters? You know, the people that tell you what you believe. Well, of course, people believe that they believe something, and then they believe that there's a reason for it. Well, I learned it from experience. I read it in a book. A very wise man told me that. My mama told me that. But if you ask them, where did you get the support for what you think to be true? They will treat it the same way, like, well, it's just there, but in some way it's not me, the same way the king looks out there, except when you're talking about now inside of the human nervous system, the individual one, they think that there is some great separation, that I acquired this. I picked this up through my own experience, through my own efforts. The king takes over, and suddenly there are people there. You become conscious, as they call it in the city, that is, language. One word divides into two words, at whatever age it happened with you. And sandut, since somebody seemed to like that one, you now have, the intellect has divided you from out there. And that the intellect has caused there to be suddenly, which is the awakening of all people. It is the eating of the fruit of knowledge, is suddenly you realize, Jesus, I'm not alone. Which is not what I guess Adam said in that story. But he went, I'm not alone. But it wasn't on the basis of, wow, there's a woman here, or wow, there's a snake here. It was, I'm not alone. There's a whole bunch out there. That was the division. That is the awakening. That is the awakening intellectually of the individual. After that awakening, and up to this point, people believe that they have gained their support through their own effort, through hard knocks, through experience. And that was when I gave a little sarcastic act of laughing. The people say, how do you know what you know? People say, well, you know, I learned it. But this knowledge is mine. And I went, ha ha. The supporters are there. You do not have to look for support. You don't have to figure out support. Anything that you have ever said that you think to be true, you didn't have to search for support. You may apparently do so if somebody questioned you in the right conditions, especially an apparent superior, your boss, somebody you're trying to apparently dance backwards with or had to, and they say, well, why do you think this to be true? And you go, well, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Descartes said something quite similar to this, and I've always held it dear to my heart because it rhymes with Descartes. But the truth be known, if you had three eyes, as is always, you know why you think what you think than you do to know what you're going to think next. You do not know where it came from, you do not know where it's going, you do not know how it operates right now. That's the benefit of old world intelligence. Those old lines, those monarchies, they can operate without any particular thought now. They just do it. They go through the motions. If we were still talking about it for a second, internally, the nervous system, then what I said would be a more complex sovereign would not only keep one eye, that is, be continually aware that I have that which is just automatic support for anything that I say I think, for anything that I apparently do think, there's support there. It's always there. I don't ever say, well, if somebody says, what do you think about so-and-so? I hate that. You don't ever stop and think, wait a minute, do I have any basis for that? Nobody does. You don't have to, because there is no basis for it. Unless you're taking your intelligence at that level as a personal individual phenomenon. And of course, if you are, then you're the sort that takes your memory as being personal and individual. But likewise, this more complex sovereign, if we're talking about this being a metaphor for an internal operation, he would also then keep his eye on, that is, have a continuing lack awareness of things that he's already heard about, but that do not apparently support or seem to be in dangerous potential conflict with what you do think is true. But ordinary people, even if it comes through their mind, it's like the king being in court, and there's all of his, he walks through, and he goes, ha-ha, and he strikes a pose, and everybody goes, yay, do it, king. And he thinks he heard somebody go, now this wide crowd, that is a conflicting piece of information that does not support what I think. And everybody's picked those up somewhere. It's like just something, this trash that got in your mind. It has no validity. But of course you've got to have the division so that there is that in you that you give no credence to that is not true. But you're aware of the fact that there are people, as hard as it is to believe, that there are people that pass for being intelligent who are not Republicans. And you say to yourself, well, yeah, I know that. I just don't know what to make of it. It just doesn't make any sense, does it? But you ignore it because it does not seem to have any specific validity to what you do think to be correct. That is, to be a Republican, or to be a Catholic, or to be a Jew, to be whatever. To think that in one little thing that this is true, this one thing is true. And of course you know if you say this is true, if you had any occasion to say it either to yourself or out loud, it is on the basis that whatever this thing was, it long ago divided. And that there are groups of people somewhere, at least one other person on this planet, that says what you think is true in this one little case. Regarding this one part of one system, there's somebody else, probably 50% of the world more or less, are going to say that's not true. You'd know that or you wouldn't say it was true. You would not be driven to think, well, this is true, unless it already divided and it turned into true, as you call it, and then not true. You would, if you were that kind of complex sovereign internally, you would continually not shunt that away, not ignore that what I ordinarily, at my old level, think to be true in this case. And of course, it's all cases, but let's make it one case. What I think to be true, that is my support. There is likewise, they may not be angry right now overtly, but what it amounts to, there are potential angry crowds at my door, my intellectual door. I have adversaries, formidable, if they work themselves up into a snit. In other words, I got about half as much force out there and energy that says that this is not true, although I say it is true. And then half of your molecules go, yeah. You're aware that half the world out there has already been divided up, and they're saying, no, just thus far that apparently it hadn't reached such a crux that the half of the world out there is going to come inside of you and attack you and pull out your brain cells and say, wait a minute, something's got to be done. Give us that ball-peen hammer and the screwdriver to put the electrodes on his brain. Do something. We got to straighten him out. It doesn't seem to be that important. Or maybe you're not that important. I hate to say that. But at any rate, they seem to leave you alone so you don't have to deal with the fact that you've got a division already inside of you. That is, of your supporters, but then you have, at the very least, potential adversaries. And they number, believe it or not, almost in the same figurative area as your supporters. But if you are then, you understand, that is more sophisticated. That is not the nature of staying alive in the city. That is not necessary to be intelligent. Not at all. Fanatics pass for being intelligent. Part of being an expert is to almost take no account of potential adversaries. That is, potential or opposing views. Now, to pass in academic circles and on television and in print, you spit in the wind that, yeah, well, I know that there has been an anti-Aristotle school. I know that some of the Grecian philosophers have tried to twist it such and such. Yeah, I know all that. So then you have paid your dues to I am really intelligent. That is, I've got two eyes. I know that there's some who have disagreed with me. But of course, by giving them such short shift, you're showing that, you know, they deserve a sentence. I know all that. But now let me give you my revamped. Let me give you Aristotle revisited. Listen to this. In other words, you can be intellectual if you can begin to see it. You can be as simple as I was saying, with no offense to that great occupation, ditch diggers and sewage septic tank cleaner outers and carpenters and attorneys. You can be that simple-minded, if we don't call it that way, uneducated, unsophisticated, that the intellect just barely working at the level that to you 1 and 1 is 1. That's it. But if you know how to hide it, if you've been wired up, and you can dress a little bit better, maybe get yourself a perm, a suit, you can be almost as simplistic in your own intellect and pass as an expert. What is an expert? As I said, you think about it later. Back to where I started to go. If you were indeed a more complex sovereign, and we were not talking about kings and politics, we were talking about the operations and the care and feeding and the attempted expansion of your own intellect, you would not only keep one eye on that which supports what you already think, which you don't know where it came from. It came with the car. Suddenly there you were, and you were thinking, and what you were thinking is what you were thinking. So you keep one eye on that, and then you keep one eye on the opposition, the potential opposition. But you would keep a third eye, because it's going to happen. These two, it may just be one at a time, of course, and one may split into 2 parts and the other one disappear. But there is that which is never perceived, never taken consideration, that which seems to be on my side, that which seems to be in my favor, that which seems to be against me, that which seems to be resisting me. God, between the rock and the Greeks, all right, the Romans in the hard place. That's nothing. That will never make sense. Plus, you can't ever deal with it. You think you are. If you thought you were that sophisticated, then I've got to watch this. Got to stay on guard, be alert. What is never seen is that even that which seems to be in your favor, on your side, your talents, your good parts, the way luck is running with you, over here. Then over here, just the opposite of all that. That's nothing. You can't ever get anywhere dealing with it on that basis, because those two, both of them can, but at any given time, one of them's about to very shortly. It's either going to die or it's going to divide. That's when nothing makes sense. Squared. That's when ordinary intelligence takes a nap, and it may just look off, but that's the end of it, because then you're faced with 3 possibilities and it just evaporates. Ordinary intelligence has no conception of it. You simply change the subject. You look off. You switch the channel. You have to. And then, after the fact, you may question yourself, or someone else may question the fact that they say, well, hey, X amount of weeks ago or months ago, you said you were going to do so-and-so. Yeah, I did, but God, since I saw you, circumstances have really changed. Well, circumstances always change. And so the person says, well, exactly how? You seem to have been so sure about what you're going to do. And in fact, you were staying there telling me that you had already laid out plans, at least mentally, of the kind of opposition, the kind of hurdles that you're going to have to overcome. You could foresee them. Yeah, I know I said that, but Jesus, I can't even tell you. It's too long. It's too boring. Let me just tell you. Circumstances were not what I expected. Things change so rapidly, and it just goes on. The point is, what I just described to you biologically took place. Even in that which seemed to be his initial interest, that which he said, that he told his friend, was his plan. I'm planning to go here, and his friend said, you even pointed out some of the difficulties, some of the resistance. He said, yeah, I did. And he says, it just got so complicated. Factors came into play that I'd never thought about. Well, what? Really, it's too complicated, it's too boring. I had to change courses, never mind. What happened? And this is not important either way, but either his, as he called it, his perception of it, my original intent divided, because soon it's going to divide, or else he's going to lose interest in it anyway. It was a very short-lived interest or attempt. It was about the lifespan of a red corpuscle. It was about that long, or else, if it did survive, and he did seem to be motivated along, it's going to, very soon, it's going to divide, so that you are not dealing with a single, apparent even, motivating force. Not even an apparent single purpose, not even an apparent single interest anymore. And ordinary intelligence just makes that want to go, oh, at least to think about, which it normally does not. Either that happened, or what seemed to be the resistance. That the man even told his friend he had fairly well plotted out. And there he went moving against it, and suddenly that son of a bitch split. The sucker divided on him. There I was prepared to take on Attila, and suddenly it's Attila and his brother-in-law. Now I was, prepared to take on 10,000 men. And in front of my very eyes, I can't explain this. Forget the Red Sea, these 10,000 men parted, and suddenly it's 20,000 men. The whole nature of what seemed to be the attempt, the whole systematic relationship between a man and his interest, and then vis-a-vis that which seems to oppose his interest, any of the two, if this is going any further, whatever the interest is, no matter how small it seems to be, no matter how personal, or no matter how large and general may seem to be the attempt, if it's going much further than the life of a red blood cell, one or both of those, the interest and the apparent opposition, is going to divide. And when that happens, ordinary intelligence cannot spot and keep track of three things. All of you should know that by now. It's not a trick, it's not psychological, it's not because of your education, it's not because of anybody's IQ, it's because of the way that the limits of the minimum and the maximum of what ordinary intelligence can perceive. It cannot look at three things. It's all you can do at the old level for me to even talk about three things. We're trying to do something, the resistance of it, and then everything else. Yeah. Every time I say that, if you're just back at ordinary intelligence, you can go, yeah, that's true, but Jesus, so what? Or I can't remember that, or maybe I could try to remember it, but I don't see the point. Why should you even think about something that's not a part of this? Because it will be a part of it, or else this is going to die. There is no predicting. There is no sense. There's no sensation that things make sense, that things are in any way reliable, unless you can take into account that, which everyone else finds not only surprising, but bedazzling to the point that they have to turn their head. That suddenly they were confronted with two possibilities, which is the dualistic nature, the minimal nature of the intellectual world of man. And he's trying to find it to make some sense. He's got the two, which makes perfect sense to everybody thus far. We got two. We got that which is right and that which is wrong. We got that which I want to do and the kind of forces that want to keep me from doing it. I got that which I want to do. Now I got the fears in me that tell me I can't do it. I got all that. And suddenly, one or both, but at least one of them, is not going to die. One of them begins to show signs of health. It divides. And now you've got three. And all you can do is look off. Take a nap, take a drink, call a friend, change your mind, forget about it. You go into a different mode. And if all of this was brought back to anyone's intelligence, and you said, is there any possibility of making sense out of what goes on in life? They would go, give me a break. This is even more confusing. You making me even think about this for a second. This is even less sense-making than what ordinarily happens. To try and look at it in even a more complex manner makes it even make less sense, right? Of course, wrong, but okay, right. There is another general area that I've mentioned several times, but I want you to see, if you can, that even that which apparently is historical, that which is the general out there, is continually misnamed. It's not that it's just in here. It's not that people in some Freudian way or psychological way are projecting that which is in their mind out there, or vice versa. It's not that simple. You're back to the dualistic nature that, all right, what I'm thinking is happening is not actually happening out there. It's just me imagining it. Of course, I don't know why somebody hasn't tried to get intelligent enough just back at the old level to try and reverse that, but that's another story. I guess people got enough hobbies. But one of the things that goes on, and that we've flown over this before, but I want to point out, criticism of all sorts, of every sort, artistic, literary, political, all forms of criticism, commentaries, analysis, all of this aids in the necessary division in some system wherein there is apparently no immediate, inherent proclivity for it to do so. Did I fly that one upside down too far? Things can be going on, a political movement, a religious movement, an artistic movement, a literary movement. And for whatever reason, once you can begin to see it, at least historically, after the fact, obviously life wanted this thing to go on a bit further. Call it the post-restoration inverted literary movement in England. I'm just trying to make up something that's so that you won't try to get identified with something real. But let us say there was this thing. And let us say that we're still having our children, life is making our children study and teach this and pass it on. It's churning out some kind of energy still in life that the people who wrote then are still remembered. But let's say at the time, or shortly after the time that this thing was named, that a human intellect somewhere began to name, say, well, what this amounts to, comparing it to what had gone before, that this is the whatever the hell I said, restoration, upside down, literary movement in England. British movement. And life, as it turns out, needed that thing to survive for a while. Perhaps, like I said, up until even today. But there seemed to be lacking in it the necessary, immediate proclivity, the inclination apparently, for this thing to divide, which has got to do to grow. In other words, inside the movement itself, look at it as being a cellular, which all institutions are, a cellular system, and it doesn't seem to be showing any inclination to divide. There doesn't seem to be a splinter group coming out of that. That the group that seemed to be the poets and the writers that made up the British post-restoration upside-down movement, there doesn't seem to be the anti or the reformed British post-restoration upside-down literary school. It just seems to be there, but life needs it to grow, to survive. All right, it doesn't seem to be happening internally. Part of the purpose of criticism is that somebody apparently outside the movement, not one of the guys or women that seem to be the founders of this, the little group that got it going, some guy writing in London, some guy writing in Paris 50 years later even, begins to critique it. That he's decided this has been overlooked, he says. But the more he reads, he realizes this era, that school, that British post-restoration blah, 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 is now beginning to exercise in ways undeniable to the keen eye its influence, even here on the continent. It's about time we took a serious, academic, intelligent, critical eye to this, and I believe I will do so. And the man writes a book, writes a series of articles. He stirs up now, either at the time it was going on, 50 years later, he stirs up now people who say there was something to that school. And I don't like the way he's criticizing that, because I have been off of my own reading. I have learned a lot from those guys. And so somebody suggests we should add this to the curriculum here at Oxford or at Yale. And then somebody else in the department says, are you kidding? I've read those guys before. this critic over there in Paris, he's making a name for himself temporarily, but there is no substance at all to those men and women that they're calling now the British post-restoration upside down. In fact, wait a minute, I don't want to talk about it. I'm going home and write a book about that. I'm going to write a serious paper. Do you understand? Apparently, this is not it, because nothing escapes out of the closet, remember. It's all in this together. But apparently, outside the organism itself, outside the cell itself, outside the institution, it would be as though, can you now take, right quick, the British post-restoration upside-down literary school and look at it as being a cell. And for some reason, life needs this cell to grow. Instead of dying like many do and just goes and it's replaced, it needs this one to grow. To grow, it's got to divide. And it seems to lack something. It doesn't show any signs of dividing. It's as though then outside it had another cell, holler, and begin to make critiques, analysis, but especially a critique. That covers what I'm trying to get you to see, the word. It begins to criticize this cell. Do you understand? It amounts to, then it stirs up this critic, then stirs up another cell over here, a group of cells that say, wait a minute, I never thought much about defending that first cell, but now that you put it that way, you're wrong, Buster. You're wrong. And another group of cells over here go, well, I had something else to do today, but now that I hear this criticism, I got to tell you the truth. I never thought a lot about it, but you are right now that you bring it up. That cell is so-and-so. They have an effect. Of course, you've got to be out of dualistic turn of mind now to see this. They have, in effect, caused that cell to split. Of course, at the old level, that's not possible. Them talking about it can't cause something to divide, right? It aids in the necessary division of something who showed no inherent imminent signs of doing so through what seems to be normally called, I'm not playing with the word, what's normally referred to as criticism. It helps set up that which at the verbal level then becomes identified as the that is, the supporters of this school, this historical event, this epoch, literarily, historically, economically. And of course, if you have got it divided up now, apparently external to the phenomenon, if you got it set up now that you've got a group of critics, like, boy, those guys were overrated when they were back there operating, when they were alive. As soon as you got that, unless that's going to die, which could happen, but if it's going to grow, then, right out of the woodwork, out of nowhere, you're going to have a bunch of people spring up to go, that is, a bunch of other cells that are going to jump up and say, wait a minute, you know, I was minding my own business. It's nothing to me. I don't have any money invested in this, and all those guys were my forefathers or foremothers. But you're wrong. If you've got a pro camp or a con camp, you're going to have its opposing part. You have then a split. You have what seems to be from a verbal view, from a three-dimensional view, you have a ready-made split, a division for that which was showing no signs of dividing on its own. It's as though it has been rent from afar. What if we're not talking about history and literary schools and movements, that this is what takes place in the individual brain? No? Don't you bet on it. Whether you thought that I lost you 4 or 5 or 2 dozen times or completely in the last 15 minutes, even if I say, could that be what's going on inside of the ordinary brain at the old world level of intelligence? And if you go, what? Or I don't think so, I'm going to tell you, guess again. You can see it out here, whether I lost too many of you or not. Criticism of all forms, everything that word entails, operates to keep things alive. They aid in the necessary, the inescapable division of all things to grow, when the thing itself was showing no inherent, immediate inclination to divide up on its own. Criticism does that. You wouldn't like to think of all the many ways that you criticize yourself? The way you look, what you think, your life, the things you've done. And if criticism sounds too hard to you, which of course would show you're the sort that I had to bring up cute to replace silly. But if you find criticism too hard, I gave you three when I started out this paragraph. The criticism, commentary, and analysis all aid in the necessary division of things when the things themselves show no inherent immediate inclination to divide on their own. So if you find criticism too hard, take one of the others. Try and get out of that. All forms of analysis. Commentary on yourself. If the thing is not showing the necessary immediate or timely division on its own, then many times all that's needed is to think about the thing itself. If you don't like criticism, it's just to think about it and ponder the matter, to analyze it. Maybe even just repeat what it is you just said. You just told somebody, well, now that you've mentioned it, I think so-and-so. And they go off to the bathroom and you say to yourself, you'd never said that before, and you say to yourself, well, I think so-and-so. Perhaps you go, that sounded good. I bet they were impressed. Were they impressed? Or you may think to yourself, why did I say that? Where's my supporters? Do I have any supporters in here for that? And maybe they all went to the bathroom too, and you're not sure why you said that. That's a form of commentary. It sounds like you're not even sure. It's not criticism. But that commentary is serving the purpose to aid division. What division? You. You, the intellectual creature. To keep you divided. To keep you healthy. You cannot be of one mind. At the ordinary city level, what do they use as one of the most horrendous, accusatory, defamations or attacks on a man is to call him a fanatic. Not just some casual way, but a real way. A single-minded. A fanatic. What could be more dangerous than a person of one mind? Because in history you don't find, I'm not saying that those are my terms, which are not biologically correct, but from a dualistic view, throughout history they have accused everybody from Caligula to Nero and up through modern politicians. A fanatic, because what they're saying, there's never been such a good thing, such a thing as a good fanatic in life. They call them something else. But it strikes fear in people's nervous system once they understand what somebody else is saying, or once they understand in themselves a fanatic is a guy that won't take anything for an answer. Don't forget, he won't take no for an answer. He won't take yes for an answer. Or if you want to look at it another way, he will take either no or yes for an answer, but you don't know which one. It's always the wrong one that you guessed. In other words, there is no reasoning with the man. In other words, you can't make sense at all. The guy won't listen to anything. That is frightening. Why? Now forget just for a minute, as silly as it may be, that I'm actually talking about fanatical men in politics, not in worldly affairs. Internally, if at the ordinary level, if we were back in the old world, you had never sailed the Atlantic blue. You were not into some new territories intellectual, and you were back at that old established level. And everything in you was single-minded, that you could be a fanatic. Would you like that? It is frightening. And the nervous system does not know why, but it knows that that is not the proper way. That would be death to me. Because the only way that I can continue, the brain knows, the nervous system knows at its own cellular level, the only way that I can continue to grow and be healthy and be vital is I got to continue to divide. And the idea that there is some stable one truth is a fanatical idea. It is a morbific idea. It is the introduction to a course in pathology. It is death to the brain cells. It is death to any institution. for the institution to no longer brook any internal conflict, for there to be an actual Stalin, for a dictatorial power, if we're talking externally now, that clamps down so hard that inside the system itself, the molecular structure that we'll call a state or a nation, that the system itself, even underground, even amongst themselves, they're to the point that it's almost a big brother choking everybody. That there seems to be that kind of power. It's a dead state. I don't care how rich it is. I don't care how powerful seems to be that tyrant right then. If it gets that single-minded, that the thing cannot split, that it cannot tolerate division within itself, it's dying. Now, and again for a foolish second while we go out, imagine I'm not talking about states and nations in here. And yet people take it at the ordinary level as being disturbing, continually surprised that I can't trust what I think. Or why is I think the right thing and other people think the wrong thing? Or why is it sometimes I feel like I might be incorrect? It is a sign of vitality. It is a sign of health, of course, to be a real explorer. You got to get into another territory. You got to get into a place where there are all new divisions. Because any division that is natural is unnecessary for you. And it will not cause anything to make any more sense. But you at least got to get the level to understand that the continual division of cells in me and everywhere, from the cellular level in my own personal brain to the institutional level out here with nations, great philosophical ideas, theories, they all must divide to grow, out there and here. You got to see that and then be over it. No longer disturbed, you're not surprised, nothing is amiss. It is a sign of vitality that's going on. I'm glad that things are good back in the old homeland. You know, I wish Spain and France and the Germanic lands and the Scandinavians and the British Empire, South America, I wish them all well. They got to divide, they got to keep it going to stay healthy. And if they don't stay healthy, we're all done for, because you're tied to the old world. That's still part of your lifeline. But you have got to find the new areas, the new territories intellectually, and then the divisions are all new. Or those of you who get real good, I could say that the divisions are specifically illusionary. If any of you are feeling good up to that point, then ignore that last part and consider that I went bye and good night just before I said what I said. Right?